Voters in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Vermont, and Connecticut are all voting in primaries today. In Connecticut, the state's gubernatorial race is getting significant attention. Democrats will choose between two candidates. Ned Lamont is the party-endorsed candidate and a Greenwich cable television entrepreneur. And Joe Ganim is the mayor of Bridgeport and a convicted felon. Ganim was convicted on 16 charges of corruption in 2003. And on the GOP side, 5 Republicans are fighting for the nomination. My colleague, Brook Silva-Braga, spoke with the Hartford Courant's Capitol Bureau Chief Christopher Keating about the governor's race in Connecticut.
Start with this crowded race for governor on the GOP side. Is there a frontrunner?
Well, it seems to be pretty much a dead heat. There is a 5-way Republican race, and a gentleman named Tim Herbst, who is a small-town mayor up here, and Danbury Mayor Mark Boughton are supposedly in a dead heat. A lot of the candidates are jockeying, and in a 5-way race, things can be pretty tight.
And then what are the prospects for a runoff?
In Connecticut, basically, the person who gets the most votes wins. So a person could be in the 30% range, 33, 4, 5, and would still win. We've had governor's races, three-way races, where the eventual candidate for governor did not even get 40%. So there's not really a runoff provision.
2 of the Republican candidates, Bob Stefanowski and Mark Boughton, say they want to eliminate the state income tax. It's been in effect since 1991. Is that a realistic prospect there?
That's a difficult thing to do. They've been arguing over that. Boughton wants to eliminate it in 10 years and Stefanowski in 8 years. The important thing to know there is that in the past fiscal year that just ended, the state income tax in Connecticut generated $10.7 billion, which is more than half of the entire budget. So any type of eliminating the state income tax obviously would have to be done over a period of years. But the important thing to remember is it generates more than half of the money.
So tough to do. Now the Democratic side, who's leading over there?
A guy named Ned Lamont, who's a Greenwich cable television entrepreneur. He's the party-endorsed candidate. He won the convention against Bridgeport Mayor Joe Ganim. Ganim did not qualify at the convention, but he went out and garnered enough signatures to get a spot on the ballot. But at the convention, Lamont beat him by about 87% to 13%.
And what are they each campaigning on?
The 2 of them, they're campaigning really on the problems of the state. Connecticut has a lot of pension liability problems. Connecticut is a very wealthy state, but they've also spent a lot of money, and they haven't put enough money. Everyone agrees they haven't put enough money through the years into the pension system. They balanced the budget many times, and the way they did it very often was not putting the required amounts of money into the pension system. It would be like a person not putting money into their 401k, and then they're 65 and they wonder why they don't have enough money.
With Brett Kavanaugh set to be the next Supreme Court justice, a lot of concern in certain states that Roe v. Wade could be overturned. And Joe Ganim is actually proposing a state constitutional amendment securing the right to abortion. He even concedes that's a long shot. What do voters think about this, and how would this even work?
That's correct. It's a little complicated. Constitutional amendments are difficult to do. You would need approval by the legislature. And if you didn't get a so-called supermajority, if you just had a simple majority, 51%, they'd have to vote a second time, both chambers of the legislature, the House and the Senate, and then it would go to a public referendum. So sometimes these things can take years to do. Constitutional amendments are a little bit difficult, and they were kind of designed to be difficult because only the biggest issues would come underneath a constitutional amendment.
Hillary Clinton won in Connecticut by 13 points. A Republican hasn't won in a presidential election there since 1988, and yet Republicans do okay in Connecticut. How do Republicans win in a state like that?
Yes, I guess Republican moderates have done well. John Rowland was governor for 10 years. He was a Republican. Jody Rell was a Republican. After him was a governor for 6 years. Before that, Lowell Weicker who was basically a former Republican who became an independent. He was governor for 4 years. So there hadn't been a Democratic governor until Dan Malloy for about 20 years. There are a fair number of moderate moderate Republicans in Connecticut. And historically, at least in the last 25 years, we've had just as many Republican governors as Democratic.
And when you say moderate, they tend to be moderate on social issues, more fiscally conservative, or what's the profile look like?
Yes, in general, Connecticut is moderate on social issues. The Republicans try to be fiscally conservative. One other point to add, the state Senate, for example, is tied at 18 Democrats and 18 Republicans. So a flat-out tie, which was the first time in more than 100 years that happened. So in other words, the Republicans theoretically are just as powerful in the state Senate as the Democrats.
Okay, Connecticut primary coming up. Christopher Keating, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.